former senior advisor to Vice President Harris and co-host of The Weekend on MSNBC, and Danielle Pleca, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and an NBC News contributor. Thanks to all of you starting us off on this really significant day. Susan, let me go to you first. What do you think the message is from what happened today in the Oval Office, not just to Ukraine, but to the United States allies?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you see is really the very visible and almost painful manifestation of what's been unfolding for the last few weeks, which is Donald Trump essentially unilaterally changing American foreign policy. He is changing sides effectively in the Russia-Ukraine war. And, we saw that a few days ago on the third anniversary of Russia's invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. He had the United States vote on the side of Russia, North Korea, and Belarus against Ukraine and against most of our Western European allies. And so today was a very personal, pointed version of that flip-flop in geopolitics. You're seeing this extraordinary parade of European leaders in the aftermath of this Oval Office confrontation, go publicly supporting Ukraine, say, we stand with you. And I fear that we're seeing not just a rift between the United States and Ukraine in the form of Trump and Zelensky, but a much wider rift between the United States and Europe. And remember, Donald Trump has been a longtime skeptic of the value of alliances, in particular, the value of NATO. His Vice President, J.D. Vance, who seemed to provoke the confrontation today in the Oval Office, again, skeptical both of Ukraine and of the value of American partnerships in Europe.
Danny, let me turn to you now here at the table. I want to talk about the point that Susan makes, which is there now a broader potential rift between the United States and its European allies? But Danny, I want to start off by getting you to respond to something that Senator Jack Reed said. He said he thought this was orchestrated, that it was likely planned, that they wanted to put him in this position to potentially make him accept a deal down the line. What do you make of that suspicion that some people have? By the way, I've spoken to some officials who say that's not the case. This happened organically. What say you?
Well, I suspect that Jack Reed's insight into what's happening in the Trump White House is probably limited. Look, we can conspiracy theorize all we want. Knowing what I know, and I've been very involved, and I work with people who've been very involved in these discussions between the United States and Ukraine, what I will say is if I had to assign blame to somebody for orchestrating anything, it would be the vice president. I think this is consistent with his ideology, his more recent ideology. I think it's consistent with what he suggested at a certain point in Munich, although at other times he suggested other things. And I think this is his crowd. This is the isolationist, we hang around with the great powers kind of a crowd. I don't think this is where the president was coming from, and nothing the president said up to that moment suggested that that was where he was coming from.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that it went off the rails once. This was going to be over once President Trump spoke. You could see Zelensky was kind of like, but he didn't say anything. And then Vice President Vance jumped in and said, I just want to make a finer point. I want to say something else. And it was at that point when the vice president went on what was a little bit of a very extensive tirade, if you will, that positioned some of what we have heard from Vladimir Putin, that President Zelensky said, can I ask you, JD? And that's when I was like, oh, no. And that was the opportunity for President Trump to say, no, you can't. We're going to continue this in private. But instead, the cameras kept rolling, and you had Zelensky in a position that I don't think he's ever been in before, sitting in the Oval Office, a place where he has been a number of times, in a place where he has, frankly, had very tough conversations, just not in front of the cameras. And so the message to our allies, frankly, is that if this president and this vice president don't like what you're saying, don't like what you're doing, they will not have a problem berating you and belittling you and potentially humiliating you in public.
Danny?
Well, so I think you drew a very good picture of how this came out. I've been watching the show. I think I have a contrarian viewpoint about this. Look, I would like Donald Trump to not only say the right thing and do the right thing. I would like everybody. I'd like all of our presidents. I would like Biden to do the right thing on Ukraine as well. But at the end of the day, watch Zelensky, okay? Dude, you want something here, right? You want American support. You want American investment in your country. Do not do this. And lean forward and start telling the vice president in front of the camera how it is and how he ought to be. He did not handle this well, and I wish he had handled it differently.
Susan, let me let you jump in here about Zelensky's role and to part of the argument Danny's making. Look, I spoke to a White House official yesterday who said President Trump is going to be more measured in his tone. Don't expect him to accuse Zelensky of being a dictator, for example, again. What about this point that Danny's making right now?
Seems to me the White House official was giving you some very uncredible spin. I mean, I have to tell you that, it's true that J.D. Vance, I absolutely agree with Danny that, J.D. Vance has been, kind of the leading proponent of a view of a very anti-Ukraine, anti-U.S. involvement in the world view of foreign policy. But what happened in the Oval Office today was extremely consistent with Donald Trump's years-long parroting of Russian lies, disinformation, and talking points about the war in Ukraine. By the way, lies and disinformation that predate Vladimir Zelensky being the president of Ukraine and go all the way back to his first term in office when he hosted Petro Poroshenko in the White House. And in a private meeting, according to his then ambassador to Ukraine, according to Poroshenko as well, whom I interviewed recently about this meeting, Donald Trump was, again, parroting Russian lies about whether Crimea was Russian, was telling the president of Ukraine to his face, well, you're just a corrupt country. And I know that because someone at Mar-a-Lago told me. So let's just be really clear that while the confrontation does appear today to be at least escalated in some way by J.D. Vance, that the views that we heard and the lies and disinformation that we heard from Donald Trump in that meeting are very consistent with who he is and the policy that he has been pursuing here towards Ukraine. There's been a lot of disinformation. There have been a lot of people spinning you and other people, Republicans here, wishful thinking Europeans for understandable reasons, telling us that, oh, no, actually, Donald Trump was going to support Ukraine. That's not happening. And I think it's very hard for people to look this in the eye and to realize what are the consequences of the United States effectively switching sides in the world to be on the side of a dictator like Vladimir Putin.
Danny, is the U.S. switching sides to be on the side of a dictator? And John Bolton says, yes, he says Trump and Vance have declared themselves to be on Russia's side in the Russia-Ukraine war. This is a catastrophic mistake for America's national security. And let's be clear, Trump and Vance now personally own that policy. It is not the view of a majority of Americans of either or no political party.
Look, I hope that's not true. I think it's hyperbolic. I know what Susan professes is a lie, that in fact Donald Trump was very excited about this deal. Now, again, we all want people to.
I do think, though, the deal, when you say the deal, you mean the minerals deal. The
minerals deal.
Which is different than peace.
Yeah, just so our audience knows, they were going to sign a minerals deal that would give 50% access to the U.S. Susan, jump in quickly, then let me let Danny finish.
I would not like to be mischaracterized on the air. I didn't say that anything about Donald Trump said it was a lie about the minerals deal. What I said was that Donald Trump spewed forth a lot of lies and misinformation in this meeting.
Yeah. Well, actually, what Susan said, I hope I'm not misquoting her, was that the White House was spinning you about how Donald Trump was going to handle this meeting. And I think, in fact, that was his full intention. Look, again, a lot of us who live in Washington, and especially those of us who are in the foreign policy community, we like those nice UN votes, okay? We like a nice UN vote. We like a nice ambassador. We like a president who kind of says the right thing, because we know that Putin is a rotten dictator who invaded another country, sides with Iran, North Korea, China, and is our enemy. Forget Ukraine, our enemy, right? So we know all those things. At the end of the day, we have the president we have. And it's important to understand that if he sees the way to handle Putin as doing things differently, if he sees the way to begin a relationship with Ukraine fresh, not on the back of the U.S. taxpayer, via this mineral deal that you described, then that's a way to get there as well. And the problem is, We spend so much time worrying about the things that don't matter. Sure, it stinks when we vote with the wrong people at the UN.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, as Israel knows all too well, who cares how the UN votes?
Can I just say
Last word, Simone.
that is very concerning to hear. It doesn't matter how the UN votes, and it matters
Never in a million years.
As some of these work at the White House, I believe that it does matter. Let me just say this. The mineral deal would be the United States getting something from Ukraine. It would be a give from Ukraine to the president. So what Donald Trump was excited about today was the minerals deal. Right. He's never talked about being excited about peace. He said today that, oh, how can I criticize Putin and say, oh, how's the deal going? He has no problem criticizing Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And so I think to Susan's point, it is very important to underscore here that the president is being very clear about who he thinks deserves criticism and berating and raking over the proverbial coals, and who deserves demure language. And the person that he believes deserves berating is the person whose country was invaded and whose sovereignty was trampled on, not the aggressor. And the aggressor is Vladimir Putin. And that is a fact.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I do think that the question remains, will this scramble the United States alliances with its allies, to the point that really all of you are making. Thank you so much for a very fiery conversation today. Appreciate it. Susan, Simone, and Daniel.